So this is a long story, but the only thing you really need to know is that the only character who does not experience some kind of blindness in this story is Jesus. It's true that the blind man is the only one who is physically blind, but every other one of the characters in this story experience spiritual blindness. The crowds watching the events unfold are not sure what to make of Jesus who has healed this man. The disciples want to know whether the blindness this man has experienced all of his life is because of something that he or his parents did to make God angry. The religious leaders are blinded by their own self-righteousness and their own power. And they don't recognize the God who they profess to believe in standing right there in front of them. And even the poor man's parents who are blinded by fear do not stand up for him. So there's plenty of blindness to go around in this story. One is physically blind. Some are blinded by what they've been taught about God. Some are blinded by fear and uncertainty. And some are blinded by self-righteousness, greed, and power. And so the challenge to us today, I think, is to listen for the Spirit speaking to us about how we might be blind to God as well. And I think if we're honest with ourselves and we're honest with God, we will discover that we share some of the blindness of at least one of these characters, if not all of them. And so that I'm not the self-righteous preacher casting judgment and beating you all over the head with the Bible, let me just go ahead and confess to you that depending on the day this week and the circumstances that I was going through that day this week, I moved from one point of blindness to the next all week long. So to begin with, I identify with the blindness of the disciples. As I said, their blindness comes from what they've been told about God, what they've been taught about God. They grew up in a society and in a religion that taught them that physical disabilities were punishments from God. Now, thankfully, today, science has changed our way of thinking about this. And Jesus has changed our way of thinking about this. And we no longer see persons with disabilities, those who are suffering, as deserving some kind of punishment because of some evil act they committed or their parents committed. Well, maybe. I say maybe because when bad, unexplainable things happen to us or to our world, we sometimes think, what did I do to deserve this? And so what is really being said behind that phrase is, maybe God has caused this bad thing to happen because of something I did, or something they did, or didn't do. What we've been taught or what we've heard in our lives sometimes is that God is in heaven dishing out punishment to people, rewarding some people and causing others to suffer based upon something they did in their life, or some might believe in their previous life. On Wednesday of this week, a 5.7 magnitude earthquake shook Salt Lake City. And the angel on top of the Mormon temple was damaged. Specifically, the angel's trumpet fell off. And almost immediately, with the virus pandemic that's already going on in our world, fundamental preachers around the world and end times fanatics began to proclaim that God's judgment had been unleashed on our world. And the angel's trumpet falling was just another sign of that. That this outbreak is somehow God's response to us. A response of anger and vengeance breaking loose in our world. God is punishing the world for their ways and their sins with this virus, I heard. And they began proclaiming that they knew that God was about to destroy the world and wanted to destroy people. And so, turn and repent before it's too late, went out. And those sermons are being preached today in churches across our country, online, and where people are still gathering even though our health leaders have asked us not to because they claim to be faithful Christians. And I just say that message is a bunch of crap. According to Jesus and according to biblical Christianity, this is simply not true. This is not how God works in our world. Rather, what we're told is despite all the bad things that happen in our world and in our lives, the way that God works in our world is behind the scenes, working to bring good out of suffering, to bring healing out of pain and tragedy. And so, no, God is not dishing out the suffering and the pain that we're experiencing right now. This does not fit the character of who God is in Jesus. Jesus, who lifts our blindness to see God for who God really is, never once inflicted someone with cancer. Never once sent an earthquake or a tsunami to punish people. And never once killed anyone. So if Jesus is God, we can be certain that God is not in the business of harming people, but of bringing wholeness and bringing healing to all people everywhere. Now, I also can identify at times with those in this story who were blinded by uncertainty and suspicion. Specifically as it relates to uncertainty and suspicion about whether God's really active in our world. Though I pray for miracles and believe that God is active in our world on a daily basis, I still find myself at times blinded by my doubts of God's presence in my life and in the world. And please understand, that's okay. There's room for doubting when it comes to our faith in God. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it faith. We call it knowledge. We do not know that God is active and alive in our world. But we have faith, and we trust, and we hope that God is active and alive in our world. But we can't prove this with some scientific experiment. This isn't textbook knowledge. What I'm talking about here is faith that leads us and enables us to have expectation and wonder and amazement at God's presence in our world and God's creative and living activity in our world. And so yesterday I asked you to share with me, those of us in the church, how you saw God's presence celebrating. How you saw God's presence and activity in your life and in the midst of our world during this crisis that we're currently in. Because the skeptical and the jaded and the disbelievers are already saying, where is your God now? If God is real, then why does God allow all of these bad things to happen? They're asking. In their blindness, they do not see evidence of God's presence and activity in our world. It's not that they're bad. It's just that they have, for whatever reason, lost their ability to see how obvious it is that God is at work in our world. Now, I can add myself to that category a couple of times this week as well. And maybe you feel that way today too, or have felt that way this week, and I want to say again, that's okay. Don't feel guilty about it. We all feel that way at times to some extent. And that's why we need others to point out ways that they are able to see God's activity when we're unable to do so. And I received so many responses from you all over the past 24 hours that I can't read them all here, which was encouraging. But here is some of what you shared with me when I asked you this question. How do you see God's presence or activity in your life or in the world right now? One wrote, I'm helping fearful people all day at work and I have complete peace. I feel hopeful for the future and I'm looking forward to seeing all of the good that will come out of this remarkable time in history. This has to be God's presence. Another, even in this crisis with all of the spiraling statistics, God has displayed God's beautiful handiwork with the beautiful blue skies and sunshine. God has given us a feeling of cleansing even in the midst of this turmoil. God's grace abounds. Another wrote, God's presence is right here at work. Human beings are so out of control, so many of us, making choices based on what's best for me, instead of for the good of everyone, which isn't working very well. So God is here offering us the chance to do things differently. Another wrote, the Italians. In the Italians I see God, and more recently in Seattle, when they gather together from balconies and sing to each other to encourage one another. Another wrote, it's as if they are more aware now that we are all in this together. People are offering help and support to friends, neighbors, and acquaintances more than normal. People are actively invoking for each other the Buddhist exhortation, may you be well, may you be at peace. Quiet acts of generosity are on the rise. The common thread seems to be, listen to this, the common thread seems to be that the God nature in people is expressing itself more. Another wrote, I've seen people treating strangers with kindness at the grocery store. The lady in front of me in line was waiting for her turn and overheard the lady in front of her getting her groceries totaled up. She was $8 short. She was going to put some items back as the lady in front of me gave to the cashier $10 to cover the total. Another wrote, in the midst of my frustration about the lack of supplies for medical facilities, a website was given by a news reporter to go to for instructions on how to make face masks. I'm making masks as quickly as I can and feel positive and grateful to God for pointing me in this direction. And then one that might make us laugh a little bit. Republicans and Democrats are getting along, and that's a miracle. I received so many responses about how you saw God's presence and activity in this world, right now in your own lives, that I can't read them all. There's too many. And this is good news. But it takes us being willing to give God credit for all of these things. Now, some might say, well, that's not evidence of God's presence. Many of those are simply human beings doing good things. But I say, who created human beings? And who gave us the capability to love? We didn't come up with that. In fact, when people ask these questions like that, this way of thinking is kind of along the same lines of saying that the one who designed and built a computer shouldn't get credit for the good things a computer is able to do. Like broadcast a worship service today for people who are stuck at home. I mean, we're not computers, but we do have a creator. And that creator enabled us to be able to love. And as the person said above, the common thread seems to be that the God nature in people is expressing itself more. Do we wonder in awe at God's presence and activity in our world? Are we opening our eyes to look for God's presence? Or have we become blind to it? Again, if Jesus is God, then we trust that God did not start everything in the universe and then step outside of creation. But rather, Jesus is life here with us. 2,000 years ago, and God's presence in the Holy Spirit tells us that God is present and is active in our world, even in the suffering. God is active whether it be putting rainbows in the sky, or healing a blind man, or giving scientists the wisdom and the ideas that they're dreaming up right now to stop the spread of this virus. But maybe we've been jaded by life to the point that we have become blind, or simply don't want to see God's ongoing activity in our world. And I confess again, I'm not immune to that. I'm sometimes blind to God's ongoing activity in my life and in the world. But if I pause, and if I look, then my blindness falls off. The blindness of the religious leaders and of the parents looked a little different. But the root of their blindness was based in fear. Fear for the religious leaders was the fear that if this Jesus was really God, then following him might cost them something. Namely, their positions of power and their wealth or their prestige. I mean, they were the big shots in their society, and they were profiting from having sole ownership of their religion in their day and selling God in their day. Jesus, who claimed to be God, had a message about God that was different than what they believed somewhat. A little different than what they had been taught about God. Jesus' message told them to use their positions of power and wealth and prestige, not for themselves, but to love and to serve others, not their own interests. And so for them to believe that Jesus was God meant that their lives would be turned upside down and that things might get uncomfortable for them. as they gave their lives away in service to God. So they willingly chose to remain in darkness. And the blindness for the parents and for others in the story came from fear as a result of being afraid that following Jesus might result in being kicked out of the synagogue or being ostracized from society. Ultimately, the cause of their blindness to Jesus was also from fear. Fear of what it might cost them if they chose to believe in Jesus and the life that Jesus was calling them to enter into. Now, I too can identify with them. I'm aware of this kind of blindness in my own life. Because it's much easier to cover my eyes to the needs of others, to what God would have me do, the costly things that God might be asking from me. It's much easier to cover my eyes than it is to act at times. So the ironic thing about this story is that the physically blind man is the one who has 20/20 spiritual vision. He's been told all of his life that he or his parents did something to deserve this. And he approaches Jesus, though, daring not to believe that nonsense. And when he encounters Jesus, he does not protest when Jesus does this strange thing of spitting on the ground and making mud out of it and rubbing it on his eyes. And he doesn't complain when he's not immediately healed, but is rather then instructed by Jesus to go and wash in the pool. He doesn't argue, but he does what Jesus says. Because, see, he is open to God. He's open to miracles, and he seems to live in this state of wonder and expectation of God in the world. He doesn't have fear when the religious leaders question him, but rather humorously, boldly ask them if maybe they too want to be Jesus' disciples as well. And all of this leads him to being further ostracized from his society. He believes in Jesus and he worships him. Maybe it's because he has nothing to lose. Maybe it's because being physically blind, sitting on the street corner, day after day with his cup, has given him time to meditate and to think and to experience God. Yeah, I don't know. But for some reason, he is open to the possibility of God. And that's what gives this blind man 20/20 spiritual vision. This incredible story begs us to take off our blindness. It helps us to take responsibility for the blindness of our own hearts and to seek God even in the midst of the most dreadful circumstances. What kind of spiritual blindness might I live with in my own life? Ask yourself, do you share anything in common with the spiritually blind folks in this story? Where are the blind spots to God in our own lives? And what might it look like for me to remove the blindness to God that I have? And so I leave you with the response from one person in our church who will remain nameless that spoke to me the most yesterday about God's presence in our lives and in our world, and I think sums up this scripture very well. This person wrote to me, "Yesterday I experienced a very happy ending when I spoke to my adult daughter in California and spent an hour and a half apologizing for being a bad parent and taking full responsibility for our long-lasting, irreconcilable differences, and asking her to please forgive me for being so difficult and distant. The backstory is that she refused to talk to me, but I always thought time would heal all wounds, and that she'd come around sooner or later. It took me 10 years of prideful silence, thinking she was wrong and I was right. Finally, I acknowledged my fear that the virus could soon kill me, as I'm a prime candidate in my 80s. Then I spent all day Friday plus Friday night praying for the right attitude and words to heal the rift. I found the words. We talked. And we ended up being at peace with one another, both saying that we loved the other and now feel so much better. Yeah. God is definitely at work in our lives and in our world if we will just open our hearts and eyes and look.